I hope you stay for the whole video because I think it's worthwhile. The shaking off of the dust from the feet and the symbolic nature of that. And I really see it kind of hit me because that's what we do. And sometimes we think it's wrong, but a lot of times we need to literally wash our hands of the situation. We need to dust the bottom of our feet off and walk no more in that responsibility, because we've done all we can do. And if the person isn't going to listen to what we're saying or change in any way, we can't make anybody else change. All we can do is control what we do through the working of the Holy Spirit. So we're under the Holy Spirit. He gives us that freedom and to shake the dust off our feet. And so it hit me, and so I studied a little bit on it. And of course, in Acts chapter 13, he says, Paul and Barnabas say they shook the dust off their feet when even though the entire city, I mean literally the entire city comes out, right, to hear the gospel preached. And what is the gospel? It's Jesus Christ and the resurrection, and his resurrection and the Holy Spirit. So they want to hear this, but of course there's always dissension. There's always the minority that don't go to the common people. It's interesting how they don't go to the common people. They go to the ones that are in charge, and they stir up this dissension, and they were asked to leave. So they dust their feet off. And of course it's given 3 times in the Gospels as instruction on how to conduct your missionary journeys. Pretty much. It's in I'll just tell you, it's in Matthew 10:14, Luke 9:5, and Mark 6:11. And then it's also mentioned in Acts 13. So it's only mentioned 4 times in the gospel, but it's in red letters. And anything in red letters, when God's telling you something in red letters, I see it as a commandment. I see it as something that I'm to do because God commands me to do this, right? So the commandment to shake the dust off your feet, I see it as a commandment to shake the dust off your feet. And I'll just read one of the gospel instructions where he says, take nothing for your journey. I'm in Mark chapter 6, down on starting in verse 8 in there. So the instructions are to take nothing for your journey except a staff, no bread, no bag, no money in your belt, right? Wear your sandals, but not an extra shirt. I still don't, not an extra shirt. I don't know. But anyway, whenever you enter a house, stay there until you leave that town. Verse 11, and if any place will not welcome you or listen to you, leave the place, shake the dust off your feet as a testimony against them. So it's like, and the way I was looking at it was our modern day way of like shaking off the dust of one's feet conveys, I wrote, shaking off the dust of one's feet conveys the sense of it's the same idea as our modern phrase of I wash my hands of it. I literally wash my hands of it, right? I'm shaking off the dust of my feet as a symbolic indication that one has done all they can do in a situation and therefore carries no more further responsibility for it. So in the spiritual sense, Jesus is telling his disciples that they were to preach the gospel to everyone. So we're told to preach the gospel to everyone, where they were received with joy, where people listened, right? In that verse, where people listened, they should stay and teach. But when their message was rejected, they have no more further responsibility. You follow? Do you track? You track with me? So they were free to walk away. Literally, they were free to walk away with a clear conscience. And that's what's important. They were free to walk away with a clear conscience, knowing that they had done all they could do. Right? They we never really know if we can do all we can do. If you follow, you track with me. You never really know if you can do all you did all you can do. But there's a point where you're so exhausted, you're like, I think I've done all I can do. And of course, under the guidance of the Holy Spirit, that's when you say whether, should I or should I not leave, So, where am I? So they were free to walk away with a clear conscience, knowing that they had done all they can do. Shaking the dust off their feet was in effect saying that those who rejected God's truth would not be allowed to hinder the furtherance of the gospel. So in a sense, what he's saying is like even the dust of the cities, because there was no pavements or anything, there was pavements, there were rock roads and all, but mostly it was dirt, and like when I first came out to Kansas, I never really saw a dirt road. I went to Missouri once on a trip, but I never really experienced dirt roads before, or gravel roads. But there's dust. It's dusty. It's dirty. It gets your car dirty. It's hard on your tires. Anyway, but so even the dust of the cities that rejected the Lord, the Lord considered an abomination. He saw that as like, this is the dust that would not be allowed to cling to the bottom of the feet of God's messengers. Now, I'm not going to allow the dust to cling to the bottom of my feet on this situation. I have no more further responsibility for it. So embedded within that symbolic gesture, is the implication that God also saw the dust shaking, in a sense. He sees that dust shaking and he will judge accordingly. When he talks about Sodom and Gomorrah, he will judge accordingly. You don't judge. You have no more further responsibility and you leave. You see what I'm saying? There's the spiritual significance to the disciples shaking the dust off their feet was the statement of finality. It's making a final statement about the people who had been given the truth, but they've rejected it. They've been given the truth, but they rejected it. And on the first missionary journey of Paul, and this is where I was coming into my Wednesday class, my Wednesday lesson, is that he goes to Pisidia. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Of course, Antioch. There are many Antiochs, but going to Antioch. But some of the Jewish leaders of that city stirred up persecution among the elite, really, and then persecution against Paul and Barnabas, and they expelled them from the region. So Paul and Barnabas say in Acts 13, verse 51, we shake the dust off of our feet as a warning to them. And where do they go? They go to Iconium. So Antioch may have welcomed the gospel, you see, but that didn't keep the message from spreading in other areas. And that's the thing, is it didn't keep the message from spreading. The disciples were still filled with the Holy Spirit when they left Antioch and they went to Iconium. So the disciples were still filled with the Holy Spirit. Even with all of the dissension going on, it didn't hinder the furtherance of the gospel. So Paul and Barnabas are following the explicit instructions of Jesus on how to maneuver around and spread the gospel. This is how you do it. This is how I taught those 70, sent them out 2 by 2, and this is how you do it. And so it works. It works that way, and it's working for them. So the apostles had proclaimed truth boldly, and they proclaimed it boldly, and that's what we need to do. A lot of times we don't speak boldly enough. We don't say what needs to be said or what the Holy Spirit asks us to say. So like I said, some had accepted it eagerly, some had rejected it with violence. And that violence, of course, it wasn't just always violence, but the violence was always stirred. And that's what's, it just didn't pop up into existence, right? Like an angry mob. It was stirred. It was influenced. by people, by these small minority of people. So it's very, very, just a couple of people can cause great havoc among a large minority of people. And we see that reflected today in today's government and in the way things are run here in the United States. We see that today with the uprising in Washington, D.C. We see that today. So there are situations in our lives, and this is what I want to get to. There are situations in our life where God calls us to stand firm. He calls us to stand firm, right? A lot of times we turn the other cheek, right? I turn the other cheek. I got to turn the other cheek. And then other times he calls us to stand firm. No more turning the other cheek. I'm going to stand firm. You follow what I'm saying? And proclaim the truth and give patient testimony. Patient is what? Patient, love, kindness, right? We give our testimony. We give what's going on with kindness, right? What we're feeling with kindness. Sometimes that doesn't necessarily come out that way, but we try to convey that with kindness. And if we don't have it with kindness, we shouldn't convey it at all. And that's something that I had to learn. If we don't have any kindness, or I can't find any kindness in my heart right now, boy, I got to keep my mouth shut. I need to wait until the right time. Sometimes that right time never comes. But anyway, sometimes we need to continue until we see the results of the testimony. Sometimes God calls us to stay, and then other times God gives us the freedom to move on, right? So what we're literally doing is in that instance, we're figuratively making, shaking the dust off of our feet. We're washing our hands, right? So when under the Holy Spirit's direction, we're surrendering those people. We're surrendering that situation to the Lord, and we're emotionally letting go. We're surrendering our situation to the Lord, and we emotionally let go. And so we have the freedom then, in doing that, we have the freedom then to move on. Then we have the freedom to move on into the next phase of ministry, into the next phase of what God is calling you to do. We have the freedom to move on into that. So Jesus' instructions to shake off the dust of our feet reminds us that we are not only responsible for our obedience to God. We're responsible for our obedience to God. I should say, we're responsible for our obedience to God, not for the result of that obedience. You follow what I'm saying? You track with me there? We're responsible for our obedience to God. So we're being obedient to God, but we're not responsible for the result of that obedience. Very important to understand that. So that's what I really wanted to tell you guys tonight. Please subscribe to the channel if you really get something out of this, and I hope you do. I know it spoke to me, so it's going to speak to somebody else. This is God's words, not mine. Praise Jesus for that, Lord. And thank you for listening. And